Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Wizard Factory live show. I apologize for the late start. We've had some technical issues going on. Hopefully, we got everything sorted out now. But we got an awesome show planned out for you guys. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're going to be talking about the true meaning of freedom, which, of course, is the subject of all subject, is the most important thing that any human being can come to understand. So we're going to dive into that topic. As usual, we got a little bit of news analysis. We've got another awesome astrological weather report coming in hot from Rodney Goodwin. And I'm joined by my very good friend and awesome truth speaker, Brandon Martin, who's waiting backstage as well. So, thank you for being here. I'm excited for today's show. For those unfamiliar, this channel is all about giving you the spiritual tools and mindsets to live a more free and empowered life. Our growing community for those seeking self-improvement, spiritual evolution, and a tribal family. So if that sounds good to you, if that is your path, join us, hit the subscribe below, click the bell to bypass the BS algorithm and truth suppression tactics being used by these platforms. My name is Logan Hart, and for everyone else, y'all know what to do to that like button.
Smash, smash, smash. Yeah.
So thank you for being here, and let's get into it. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen. I forgot to set that up real quick. It's just been one of those days. Everything's a little funky in the air. Okay, there we go. Let's do this one. All right, so this is show number 3. And as we'll be getting into the true meaning of freedom later, I kind of thought this would make a good little piece to touch on briefly that does kind of relate into that. Apparently there's some protest happening in Paris right now. And of course, the government's cracking down on these people. Increasing anger presents the biggest challenge to whatever douchebag politician this is, who passed some law that the people don't like. He bypassed the political process, which apparently was within his abilities to do via the mechanisms in place, but it riled people up nonetheless. So police in Paris have banned gatherings. Just think about this statement for a second, and we're going to be diving into this. This is why I picked this as something to focus on here. The fact that this government here, and pretty much all governments, they truly believe they have the right to forcibly stop people from gathering together, especially in protest of something that they themselves did, the government did, and they're not liking that. So this politician passed this state pension stipulation without a parliamentary vote. So he resorted to controversial executive powers. I find that interesting that some executive powers are perfectly fine and well and acceptable, and we need it, right, to preserve law and order. But some executive powers are controversial. This just shows the cognitive dissonance in the minds of people, of statists. And so while legal under France's constitution, so even by their own rules, this was something he had the ability and right to do, the move has infuriated opposition parties and led to spontaneous street protests presenting the greatest challenge to the president's authority. Interesting. So pressing on here, it also mentions that there's a 13-day bin strike is expected to continue, leaving trash piled up, basically. So this is how another way people are choosing to protest. And then some people, um, let's see, there was something about, where was that? It's further down, I guess. Some people also broke into a building. Here it is, yeah. Uh, a town hall building and are trying to set fire to it. They didn't actually succeed, but um, again, so what I wanted with this piece is to look at both sides. First of all, the government and their mindset, thinking that they have the authority to, you know, forcibly stop people from gathering, especially in protest of something that it is doing. Not to mention the laws that itself is doing, which are causing this backlash to happen. But also on the end of the people, that the people are demanding that they fix it, that they change it back or whatever. Not seeing the problem itself is government, is authority. They're basically trying to appeal to that authority and get it to, like, quote unquote, do what it's supposed to do, but they don't realize it is doing what it's supposed to do. This is what government does. They have been largely peaceful, but riot police fired tear gas and clashed with demonstrators on Friday night. Fearing more trouble, Paris police on Saturday banned further gatherings due to serious risks of disturbances to public order. So it's not the government making laws and these dictates backed by violence. That's not the disturbance to public order. It's the people not liking that and actually trying to push back up against it. That's the disturbance to public order. Again, there's gaslighting in pretty much all of these propaganda pieces, is like completely inverting the truth on its head. And 2/3 of French people oppose the pension changes. So, what is government but mob rule, right? Even in this case, 2/3 of the people are against the decision made. Yet, the people that are pushing back against it are getting tear gassed and restrictions on their right to gather and protest, etc. So I think the point is clearly made. Even if Bourne's government does survive, Macron has emerged from the episode politically damaged. With 4 years left, it's difficult to see how he will continue with his reformist agenda. So the last point that I wanted to make here is just looking at how it's funny that people are all about government until it does something they don't like, which is what they're begging for it to do, is govern them, like rule them, and then suddenly they're oppressed once it does something they don't like, not realizing that that's what they're actually advocating for, that the consent to be governed is a fallacy. It's performative impossibility. You can't consent to be governed any more than you can consent to be raped or robbed. It doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, just a quick little piece for today. But I thought that would be a good kind of like setting the stage in terms of what we're going to be getting into later with Brandon. So that's it for the news. And yeah. So that's it for the news, and we're going to go over some quick announcements right quick, and then we'll have Rodney take over for the astrology report. So quickly to let everyone know, the shop on the wizardfactory.com is now open. As you can see, let me go full screen here. There we go. This is probably one of my favorite shirts that I designed in there. It's got this Milky Way background. I actually totally forgot to mention, but Will was with us last week. He was wearing this shirt as well. So really cool looking shirt. That is actually this one right here that I'm wearing. So, and there's a hoodie that has the same print on it. There's all kinds of, female designs. There's bags and coffee mugs and all kinds of stuff. So really something for everyone. So do check that out. And thank you to everyone who has so far placed orders for your Wizard Factory gear. I think also interesting to note, YouTube has recently launched its podcast new podcast format or whatever that's going to be going into YouTube Music, which is pretty fascinating. It's a little known fact. I was surprised to hear that actually YouTube is the biggest platform for podcast, even over Spotify, Apple, all those. And so now they're basically fully embracing that. So you'll be able to, I'm not sure how it's going to be fully rolled out, but you will be able to see the video or audio podcast of the Wizard Factory podcast here on YouTube. And just to let everyone know who's not aware, you can also check those out on those other platforms such as Spotify. The links are in my link tree. If you click below, go to podcast, it'll have every platform. There's like a dozen of them that it's on. So whichever one you like the best. And for those unaware, yeah, you can listen to the audio or video version of the podcast while you're, doing chores or driving or whenever you like to listen to your podcasts. So one last quick thing. I thought it would be worth mentioning for those who don't know about this. So you hear a lot of YouTubers talking about click the bell, get notifications. But I was talking with a friend of mine, Chris Jansen, who mentioned, well, I don't like getting notifications on my phone. And I realized that maybe what a lot of people are assuming is that that we're just talking about phone notifications. So for those not aware, if you do subscribe to a channel and you click the bell, you can have the notifications off on your phone if you don't like getting, invaded or bombarded by that on your phone. That's fine. But this bell right here is basically so you can curate your own feed instead of hoping that your favorite content and favorite channels will pop up on your feed here. Any channels that you've clicked that bell on will show up here in like a customized feed, that if you don't want to miss any videos, this this is where those channels will show up. So that's where you'll get notified. Even if you're not on your phone, you can just check that periodically to see, a new video by Wizard Factory, or they just went live, or whatever, like that. So just thought I would clarify that for those who may not have actually known about that. So yeah, that is it for the announcements. So let's go ahead and get into it with our man Rodney. Hey Rodney, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. Great content. It's going to be a great show. How's everything on your end, man?
Oh, good. Things are going good here. Just trying to stay consistent, bringing top quality value anytime I can while managing being a full-time truck driver, which is quite a task.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. That's a lot. But hey, you're doing it. You're forging, and that's what's important, man. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
so what do you got for us, man?
I was looking at, we're having all these little bit of technical difficulties, and I went and looked at the chart, and of course, Uranus is squaring off with Moon in Aquarius. So you start to see how that, that tension between the Moon energies and the Aquarian energy, which rules devices and gadgets and the internet, is all kind of like, like there's this tension going on.
There you go.
Yeah. So, and interesting enough, you're talking about freedom today. We're going to get into Pluto moving into Aquarius. Aquarius is anchored by the Uranian gate, 11th gate of Uranus energies, and Uranus is the planet of freedom. So it's interesting how these synchronicities keep happening. It's pretty cool.
Right on.
Yeah, I know, right? So today I just want to get into a little bit about how Pluto works and how the Plutonian energy, it's shifting gates now. Okay, this is a generational energy. So when we're dealing with Pluto, we're dealing with a 20-year transit, roughly. So we're dealing with a generational shift. So this is what's taking place. So everybody that's born now and over the next 20 years, because it looks like, Pluto's going to move into Aquarius in March 23rd. It's going to stay there 3 months. It's going to retrograde back into Capricorn, flux at the gates. It's going to move back into Aquarius in January, in Capricorn in January. And then when it moves back into the Aquarius in September, it's going to be there until 2044. So we are coming into a 20-year transit with Plutonian energy that's going to literally transform our world.
Wow.
Things are not going to be the same. And just a little back note, dealing with the Capricorn energy and Pluto, kind of some of the things that we were dealing with that. Pluto is the structures in context to Capricorn and its foundation. So when we're dealing with our Plutonian energy on a collective level, what we're dealing with is transformation, transmutation, transformation. Pluto's like the wrecking ball, man. It comes in and it just hits stuff and wrecks anything that that needs to be transformed. It's all your wealth and your power. It's the hidden secrets. It's the mysteries. It's shadow aspect. It's the underworld journeying. It's bringing things from the underworld up into the light in context of transformation. It's death and it's rebirth. It's a lot of power. And when you're dealing with Capricorn, the Plutonian energy in Capricorn, one of the things that's been happening is that the structures have been tested. Now you're going to see the effect of those structures being tested as it moves into Aquarius. Now, if you go back to 2008, when Pluto moved into the Capricorn gate, what happened? We had a huge housing crisis. Everything that was all the greed, all the easy credit, all the stuff that was going on with the housing market got revealed. Literally, what happened? There was a crushing that took place with that housing market, and shit hit the fan. Now that we're having another flux with Pluto going into the Aquarian gate, what's happening? We're starting to see the banking industry start to get pressure put upon it in context to what? What's being revealed to the actual structure of the banking industry, which is a collective entity where people bring their money into a collective entity. That's what we're dealing with. So when we're dealing with Aquarian energy, we're dealing with the collective consciousness. And this is why things are going to really get crazy, because not only are we going to be testing the Aquarian gate with the Plutonian energy, but look, Saturn has had 8 transits through the Aquarian gate since the inception of our country in 1776. The first test was 1777 when the Plutonian energy entered into the Aquarian gate. We just had our Pluto return as a country in the United States. See?
Wow.
So all that energy now is going to be tested to the Aquarian gate. See? And so all the structures that are stopping freedom from coming forth, and we're talking all the way down from the banking to government to law enforcement, all the way down, in context to all this, are going to be tested by the Plutonian energy. Because what has happened? Saturn has moved through that gate 8 times in context to the collective consciousness and the building and the putting together of these organizations, all the way down. And also on the flip side, this is the time when the transformation is going to take place to that gate, to that 11th gate, in context to organizations and energies and groups coming together like one great network. See? So the launching of the one great network is part of this moving into the Plutonian energy, into the Aquarian age. see, into the Aquarian generational, structure that's taking place. And so this is what we're dealing with right now, coming into that 11th gate, because the 11th gate is all about humanitarianism, being a humanitarian and coming up with the ideas and the inventions to make our world a better place. And freedom has to be the kingpin to truth with those structures. If you don't have the structures of truth and freedom as the foundations of what you're doing, it will crumble. See? And that's what we're going to see these next 20 years. You're going to see major, major strikes against inverted energies. If we can come up as mages and as those who are doing this work to begin to come together and bring structure, foundation, and then as the air magician is with the Aquarian energy age, think of it like this. The Capricorn gate is like the prima materia. It's like the material of the house. It's all the drywall, the beams, all the structures that you want to build with the house. It's all your plumbing supplies, all the way to electrical supplies. It's everything that you want to bring together. With the Aquarian, it's the air magician. It's the blueprint of how things are actually put together. So you're putting together, you're taking, the 2x4s and the drywall and the plumbing stuff and the electrical stuff and the foundational stuff in context to the concrete and everything. And then you're formulating a plan on how you want to structure the house together, where you want to put the plumbing, where you want to put how you want to run the electrical, how you want to build the foundation, where you want to put the rooms, how you want to configure it. That's Aquarius. And so when you understand how Aquarius works, it's really dealing with building the foundations and the structures and bringing all that together and connecting it. It's like the connection. It's collective connection. And this is our opportunity here as mages and as truth sayers and building these structures. This is our opportunity to reclaim our world this next 20 years, to begin to literally bring the foundations to the next generation. Isn't that great? Isn't that awesome?
I love it. It's not going to be easy. That's for damn sure.
It's the challenge of challenges.
But guess what? The good news is when you're standing in fucking truth and you have that as your foundation and you have cosmic law, which is such as what you're talking about right here. These are big, massive cycles that are taking place, way bigger than some low life scum in suits and bankers and people like that are trying to rule the world. Like, that's what they're up against. They're trying to fight against the universe, and they will be crushed.
Exactly. And that's why, as we continue to hold the standing wave of consciousness to the higher aspect, which is kind of the Uranian energy, if you want to look at it in context to your higher self, the Uranian energy is the great awakener. That's what it does. It's the lightning strike into the tower. It's what's breaking down the structures and the organizations that aren't bringing forth the actual truth and freedom within our world and within our planet. See? And so if we can get a hold of that in context to our state of mind and vibrational correspondence and holding that truth within ourselves as individuals, and then bringing that energy, see, this is the time to come together, man. Bringing that energy into the group setting now, see? And like we're doing right now through the technology, because Uranus does rule or underpin devices and gadgets and technology and internet. This is how it works. And so the Uranian energy is bringing us together through the technology, see? And so the next 20 years, talk about inventions that are going to be created. Whoa, we're going to see some major things roll out in context to technology like we've never seen. And we can use that for our advantage and to bringing forth what we want to see happen in context to our first eye and our third eye, what we want to actually see happen on this planet. And this is where we have to keep our mindset as men and women doing this work.
Yeah. What that's bringing up for me too, there is a huge revolution happening in the financial world right now. And
Yes.
this is big time, like getting into what you're talking about here, Rodney, is the collapse of the banking system, which is one of the greatest frauds and scams in human history, is falling apart as we speak.
Yep.
And what are we seeing happening on the other side of it? Bitcoin has been ripping ever since all these banks started going down.
Yep.
Some of you may not be aware of this, but you're talking about technologies, you're talking about networks, you're talking about freedom and sovereignty. That's literally what Bitcoin represents. I know there's a lot of truthers out there that don't understand this. They're very against cryptocurrencies and they think it's all, you know, I don't know, the mark of the beast and just all this fear-based nonsense. They don't understand that technology. They haven't looked into it and actually researched how it works. It is a decentralized network that basically puts financial sovereignty back into your own hands to the point where the banks, the government, they can't they can't touch your Bitcoin. Like they can try to ban it, they can try to regulate it, but at the end of the day, self custody of your own, coins, it is completely in your control. The currency can't be devalued by inflating it, by creating an infinite
Yes.
supply of it, like what the bankers have been doing to your savings for decades.
Yes.
Um, and again, it is a technology that is on the rise. It's an actual solution, and you can look no further than how the governments are reacting to it to tell you what they think of it and what it represents, because they are really pushing back, especially people like Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren. God, that woman is a psychopath. I mean, just just the sight of her turns my stomach. But I mean, they're pushing really hard back up against this. The SEC, Gary Gensler, has been really going after different cryptocurrencies, calling everything a security, and that therefore it's under their jurisdiction to regulate it. And I mean, the good news is this is a global phenomenon. So it's
Yes.
bigger than the U.S. government. It's bigger than the Federal Reserve. Like they can do what they can, and they might make things pretty difficult for a while, but they can't stop it. There's no way. And the cat is out of the bag in terms of what the technology is. Blockchain inherently is and represents is digital sovereignty as far as wealth, your money, but that's really just the first use case. There's so many other ways that there's so much innovation happening. Again, to your point, Rodney, there is so much just within the blockchain space happening right now. And I know I'm going, I'm talking a lot about this because this is something that I study a lot. Like I spend a lot of
Hmm.
time researching this almost every single day because I find it so fascinating. I mean, it's great that hopefully it's going to be a vehicle to, secure my financial freedom, but also I'm just fascinated in what's happening, like historically, as this new emerging technology is providing a real solution to all these problems that we've been, dealing with for way too freaking long. And this is the time. Like the timing is no coincidence. This just started
No.
happening this past week. These banks going
Yeah.
under, and Bitcoin is ripping because it's like, okay, people are finally starting to get it because they're. It's not just theoretical. They're starting to feel the sting and feel
Hmm.
that fear of, oh shit, my savings, my retirement,
Hmm.
all of
Hmm.
this is
Hmm.
actually at risk.
Yeah.
That's the third party risk that you deal with when you
Right.
leave it in these centralized institutions. It's proving the use case for what Bitcoin was designed to do from the beginning. So that's just one thing I wanted to kind of plug into what you're talking about here. Very, very massive things happening. It just in that world right now. There's a financial revolution happening, and many aren't quite yet aware of just how
Look,
significant this is.
look, Pluto's going to come and test the Saturnian structures that have been built over the last 8 transits through the Aquarian energy since 1776, because we've never been in Pluto and Aquarius before, so in our country. That just what's it's happening. This is the second time. This is our return to that gate, literally. And where is Uranus setting? It's setting in Taurus, right? And Taurus is all about what? Finances.
Yes.
See? And
I'm bullish.
so do you see how the astrological energies correspond in context to vibrational correspondence to what's happening in our world? It's massive. This is why astropsychology and looking at things from that point of view is so powerful, and it's so informative, and it really lifts the veil of the smoke, all the smoke and mirrors off of shit. See, because it's revealing that which is hidden. It's coming up, and with Pluto, that's its job. Its job is to come in and reveal that which is hidden and bring it up to the light in context of death and rebirth. See, and that's what it does. And it comes in with a big wrecking ball, and it breaks shit down to transform it. See, now there's a dark side to this transit too. See, there's an evil side to this transit, and that is, and as well as I do, that inherently anything that is evil is a choice. If you want to step into that, it's a choice. You are choosing to align with the evil intent of something. And that's how things get wielded in context to distortions. But there is an AI agenda on this planet as well, in context to how things have been recycling back from the Atlantean cycle, coming back up now for review again here on this particular cycle that we're on right now. And this is where we have to catch it and realize that this right here is the true technology that we have to master. This is the organic technology in context to the Aquarian gate and the 11th gate that we need to come into mastery with. And that's all the way down to your physical body, your mental and emotional aspect, your temporal existence, how you're wielding your consciousness to your own vibrational correspondence and your internal dialogue. And in context to that, this is how we change it. See? Because we are doing that work, and then when we come together into the Aquarian gate in context to what it represents, the energy is then magnified. See, it's like bringing together, you're not just working with one energy now. Now you're working with a collective energy that have the same goals, they have the same mindset, they have the same intent, and with that, it's like magnified by thousands and 10,000s of times now. That's the Aquarian energy. That's the water pouring out from Pisces into the 11th gate in context to what? The healing that needs to take place on this planet. See? And that's what needs to happen. We need to heal. And the planet needs to heal. And the people on this planet got to get their shit together in context to their state of mind. Last night, me and a friend of mine, we just went out. I haven't been in a bar in so long. We went out and listened to a band, and the programs that are running in people's minds is mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah.
It's mind-blowing when you see it. And you're just like going, holy shit, and when you see it, you can't unsee it, So we're in for some major, major stuff. And interesting, you're talking about the French Revolution, the French thing. Do you realize that in 1792, during the transit with Uranus, that King Louis and Marie Antoinette were dethroned during the French Revolution?
Cycles, man.
Isn't that interesting?
Everything
1792, man. They threw him in prison because of lack of food and economic woes. It's mind-blowing, dude, how these cycles repeat themselves. We're dealing with another French thing going on here in context to Boris, what's going on there, right? And now look, he's going to be checked out. See? Because of the energies that are coming in now. And so look, we're in for a wild ride, guys. Not only do we have this 20-year transit with Aquarius going into 2044, but we've got what? We've got Saturn and Pisces right now these next 2.5 to 3 years, which is all about what? Learning how to bring that which is invisible into the visible realm. Bringing our imagination, our intuition, everything that we can imagine in our eye into manifestation now. See? And this is why we're working together. This is why people got to get on this now. This is why people got to start coming together to build, to connect the structures and the foundations together to bring forth the true freedom and the truth that needs to be on our planet, man. And I'm really excited because, yeah, there's a dark side. We know they want to see the AI agenda. We know they want to go through the transhumanism agenda. We know they're trying to, morph the male and the female into some kind of hermaphrodite bullshit thing. We understand that. We know what's going on. We can see it. But again, what is the key here? The key here is to keep forging, keep working with the energies, keep working with yourself, and keep battling your own self within your own self to level up your human consciousness to that Uranian energy, to that 11th gate, and understand that we got this. We can do it. It's a challenge of all challenges right now. But
Yeah.
my question is to the audience, are you fucking up to it? See? Are you up to the challenge of challenges? Not only on your own individual life, but bringing it to the platform, bringing it out into bringing your own game, getting on the playing field, and getting it done.
Yeah, well said, man. And that's interesting to me to ponder. Are these people out there in France, are they meeting their own shadow and their own illusions with the same, fight, the same vitriol as they are towards their ruling class? And are they allowing the trash to pile up within their own minds? Or
Right.
are they setting fire to the government buildings of illusion in their own psyche?
Right.
Very interesting stuff. So, great segment there, brother. Do you have any last minute things you want to share, and then quickly tell people where they can find you?
Yeah.
So,
So basically, what we're dealing with the Plutonian energy moving into Aquarius is transformative themes. This is what we're dealing with in context to group dynamics, technology, all the way down to freedom. We've got to transform our world into a place of freedom, and awakening. And that awakening is on the individual level, and then it's brought to the group level. So technologies, data, storage, science, systems of power systems are all going to be transformed over these next 20 years. Look, 2008, it wasn't 3 months where Pluto moved into Capricorn and the banking crisis happened. Okay, we're coming into another place where Pluto is moving into Aquarius. Look for banking shit to start to really rev up here. I mean, they're talking about now the Republic Bank just got bailed out by what? 35 banks came together to give them some type of like 35 billion or 135 billion dollar loan or some shit like that, you know? And it's just like I'm looking at this and I'm going, the banking structures are already being tested, and Pluto hasn't even moved into Aquarius yet. See? So it's going to be a wild ride, and you need to prepare your mind, prepare your heart, for what's coming. And I'm not a doomsday, prophet or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that being prepared is a good thing. It's not out of fear. It's just being prepared and being wise. You
yeah,
know, having common sense and being wise. So everything's going to be tested, man. But the group dynamics, and the connection to bringing, humanitarian projects to the table here these next 20 years, that are going to better mankind in context to our organic ascension. This is what we have to step up into. So,
excellent.
yeah. So you can get a hold of me at heartcoreproductions9@gmail.com, heartcoreproductions.com. And then I have a Facebook page that's also Heartcore Productions. You can also hit me up at Rodney Goodwin on my Messenger account if you want a astrology reading. I do transit readings, I do natal chart readings, and I do synastry chart readings, which are partnership readings. And then also getting into tarot, runes, astropsychology, counseling, that type of stuff. I can help you through a lot of different things in context to looking at the energies and maybe wielding your transits in context to choices. So if anybody is interested in that, you can hit me up at those spaces. And Logan, thanks for having me on today, man. I really appreciate your show. I think what you're doing is fantastic, and it's just going to get better from here, bro.
Yeah, Rodney, thank you so much for that, man. It's definitely an honor to have you as a part of the show. You have so much wisdom and insight to bring from that astro psychological perspective that you share with us. So thank you, man. I appreciate everything you're doing as well. Everyone, do go give him a follow. Check out his channel. He posts a lot of regular, astrology updates and commentary on other things as well. So, and hit him up for his services as well. So,
Yeah. Thanks,
yeah,
man. It is my passion.
brother.
All
Much
right.
love. Take care. Thank you, man.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Great stuff from Rodney there. So, we're going to get into the next segment where we're getting into our topical discussion here in just a moment with Brandon Martin. Before we do, I quickly want to share a couple of promotions. First, I encourage everyone to follow me and the Wizard Factory on the various social media platforms, whatever your preferred platforms are of choice. I'm quite active in all of those places as well, which is a lot more short form, digestible throughout your day, kind of thoughtful type content when perhaps you don't have time to sit down and listen to a 2 hour show or a podcast or something like that.
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I just want to take a quick moment to offer you a special gift. It's the free initiation package download. This is a free download package that includes the Toolbox mini course. I created this package to equip you with all of the essential tools you need for any type of energetic or magical practice for anyone serious about their spiritual development. It's comprised of 3 parts: the circle, the breath, and the voice, where you'll learn how to cast the Circle of the Magi, various breathwork techniques, including a powerful guided breathwork meditation, rune galler, and more. You'll also get access to the Inner Sanctum, our private Facebook group and Discord server, as well as some Wizard Factory wallpapers for desktop and mobile, all for free. And for those who've already seen this course, I'm happy to announce that this is a brand new remake with better production and even more information. You can find the link to get yours in the description below. So check it out and let's get back to the content.
All right. So that is the initiation package. As you can see, I've put the QR code right here on screen. So if you want to check that out, just pull up your phone and sign up for that right now. So thank you for everyone watching so far. Let me know in the comments, how are you liking the show so far? How's the audio? Is everything sounding good? What'd you think of Rodney? What'd you think of the news segment that I covered earlier? And hey, make some noise for Brandon Martin, who's waiting backstage. And let's go ahead and bring him on right now. Brandon, what's up, brother? Welcome to the show.
It's such a pleasure to be here. How you doing?
Doing good, man. Feeling great. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a beautiful day out here in Ohio, and really excited to get into the topics. And I really like the content that you're bringing to the table. Always, I really enjoy working with you. It's such a pleasure to be here again, to talk on your show.
Yeah, I got a lot of great feedback from the recent podcast episode that you and I did about the history of the mystery in the culture traditions. That was a really fun segment. So anyone who is watching that hasn't checked that one out, definitely go to the channel and watch. That was a very good segment as well. So yeah, glad you're here, brother. And what a great topic to get into, just in terms of fundamental importance. And something that you, Brandon, are very well versed in as well. In fact, I believe this is kind of in the territory of what you're going to be getting into in your upcoming presentation. Isn't that right?
Yeah. My upcoming presentation is called The Spirit of Freedom. So this aligns perfectly with what I will be talking about at the Funnel 3 conference. which I'm really excited to be part of that as well. Again, because it's such a great community and there's so much great work and content coming together. And that's what this is really all about, right? Is building networks and building great communities with people who have like minds and like interests, who are living in harmony with natural law, who are really ready to stand up and fight against the tyranny in whatever ways that they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is funny how that worked out because that was not planned. I actually didn't know that that's what you were doing your presentation on until after I set everything up before I was getting ready for preparing on the show this morning. I saw that was on your Facebook and I was like, oh, well, that works great, doesn't it?
Right, right. Yeah, it lines up a little synchronicity there. Absolutely. Yeah, I actually had chosen a different topic originally, but I felt that this would be more in line with what the funnel conference stood for. Last year, I did the green language presentation, which was I was trying to bring in more of the esoteric mysteries into the conference, rather than trying to be repetitive and kind of an echo chamber with everybody. But I think this year I'm going to bring a lot of really hard hitting topics to the table. It might be a hot take, maybe people won't like it, but it's the truth and they're either going to align with it or not. And that's what I'm here to do, is just speak the truth unapologetically.
Absolutely. And I mean, if it's anything like your previous work, I'm sure it's going to be a banger, and I'm really excited to check that out as well.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Brandon, I'm not sure if people are hearing this on their end, but there's a little distortion coming through on your voice. So I wonder if we want to tweak those settings again. I mean, ultimately, if we need to turn both of those things back on, even though it might not be the best quality, if it eliminates that distortion.
Let me look. Let's see here.
Let me know in the comments if
Is that
okay.
better? Is that any better?
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll
Yeah.
roll with that for now.
Yeah. I think it's this mic, actually. I'm actually sending it in to get repaired on Monday. So
Interesting.
it could be the mic, actually.
Yeah.
It has like a little flutter or kind of distortion in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of like following your voice, kind of this warbling, kind of distorted sound. Anyway,
Right.
it does sound better now. So let's go ahead and dive into this awesome topic that we have today. And
Awesome.
I want to start by sharing this quote from Larkin Rose that I think is a really good precursor to what we're going to be talking about here. He says, "The truth is, one who seeks to achieve freedom by petitioning those in power to give it to him has already failed, regardless of the response. To beg for the blessing of authority is to accept that the choice is the master's alone to make, which means that the person is already by definition a slave." And that does relate quite well to the article that I covered as well earlier on. It's the same kind of idea that, first of all, the people have so-called consented or, given this authority to the government to make these decisions backed by violence. And then rather than just taking their freedom back, they go and beg to their masters to please give us our freedom back. That is you're on your end, you're playing the game, and you're by extension legitimizing your own enslavement. These people have some sort of actual authority to make these decisions over every aspect of your life. So, Brandon, what do you think about that?
I think it's a great thing to start out with. I did want to talk on the topic that you brought up earlier with that article. And I think there's two extremes to this. And one extreme is that you have the absolute authoritarianism of the government, which you have the iron fist coming down on individual liberties every which way. And then you also have the mob rule, which is the lynch mob, really, that comes out of the cancel culture and all this stuff from the mass public, right? And what we see throughout history is the repetition of this kind of cycle, which I'm here to break cycles. I don't want to stay in these repetitive cycles of slavery and then freedom. I want to get to an evolutionary level where we can consistently maintain freedom. And maybe it does wane a little bit, but it doesn't go absolutely all the way back down into, totalitarianism and absolute authoritarianism and just, debauchery pretty much, right? And dystopianism, right? So we don't want to go back into these cycles over and over and over. And I think that we can learn and raise our consciousness and evolve the species into a higher type, that we don't have to do that. And that's kind of what my work is all about. But yeah, you have this issue with these two dichotomies, right? Where you have the mob rule of the people, and then you have the totalitarianism and the authoritarianism that's coming from that, right? And they're consenting to it. The mob is consenting to that. So what they do is they go out and they demand change from the authoritarians, and then they don't actually get that change. So they get mad, then they rise up, and then they rebel, and then we end up with the same consciousness level that's already there, and it just repeats the problem. So the masses end up replacing the authorities in the throne, and they just take up the throne again, right? And this is what's happened throughout all history with all revolutions. There might be a temporary period, and I say our revolution was the most significant at bringing in liberty for a time period back in 1776. But really, we still didn't have enough evolutionary progression in our consciousness and understanding causality. And also, I think that there's a little bit of nescience going on then too, because we didn't have all the necessary information, and we were still, trying to weed out what liberty really is. And that's what we're really trying to talk about here, is what liberty actually is, obviously.
Right, the true meaning of it, not what people have been conditioned to believe that it is or is not.
Right.
And this was bringing up a kind of a realization to me as you were talking, because so you have this dichotomy. There's the government doing the bad thing, and then there's the people that's railing against the government for doing the bad thing. And what it kind of brought up for me was like this tired old story that you hear from people that love to talk shit about their exes, right? This is a very common thing, and it's always like, oh, she was such a bitch, he was such a control freak, or whatever it is. But these people, you almost never hear them taking responsibility for their part in how they co-created that situation for themselves. And
Right.
because of that, guess what? Then the cycle repeats, because they didn't learn any lessons from it. They didn't take that responsibility on, well, how did this happen the first time? So it happens again, and it happens again, and it happens again. And then it builds up to this point where now they're building this narrative about, oh, there's no good men, there's no good women, right? And it's all stuck in this victim mindset and never taking responsibility for the co-creation of that dynamic. And therefore they are inherently disempowered, and they're completely unable to create a different outcome, because they're stuck in that unconscious feedback loop. That's a concept that we covered a while ago on the podcast, but it was a pretty early on, and it's such a good one. I think that I'm going to have to do a whole show and revisit that one, because it's incredibly powerful. But your thoughts on that, what I just said?
I think it's exactly what I'm talking about, and we see this far too much. It's the belief in authority that's giving the authoritarians power, right?
Mhm.
That's the main thing. That's the causality of it. It's the false axiomatic ideas that have been running throughout thousands of years and tens of thousands of years that is creating these systems and manifesting these systems. So whenever we abdicate our own personal responsibility and accountability and project it onto a higher source, whether that's a divine source or whether that's an authoritarian source, right? We have these same issues. And it's just a way for people to never actually look at themselves, do their own shadow work, and say, hey, I'm actually complicit in this. And my behaviors every day are actually causing these types of systems to come about because of my consciousness level. And I actually haven't worked on myself enough to get out of this deplorable state of mind, obviously. So I haven't done enough internal work, and this is what we really need, is internal healing when it comes to this, right? But I also think there's a big academic issue with this, because obviously we're very indoctrinated by academia and scholarship, and that doesn't mean that all of academia and all of scholarship is absolutely incorrect. So I always get and we talked about this in the last show. I always get a kick when people say, since some of history is ambiguous or has been corrupted or
It's
changed
all
in
a
some way,
lie.
then it's all a lie, right?
Yeah,
And that's the other extreme. And these are the two polar extremes. It's the same thing, right?
it's a
And whenever you go to
dialectic.
either extreme, you're obviously going to be failing at hitting the middle path. And you have to hit the middle path to really get to the goal that you're trying to get to. And really, the goal is really about the journey of progression, the journey of constantly learning and constantly progressing and growing. So, liberty, when it begins to take root in somebody's mind, it's like a rapid plant growth. It's like a really fast plant growth if they have a strong mind and they have a good neocortex. And yeah, there, as the quote somebody commented in there, it's a lot to parental abandonment issues as well. That's why a lot of people have this. So it's definitely one side, like traumatic issues that we have, right? And we can even take that into epigenetics as well, that we epigenetically have been conditioned into slavery so much that our genes are actually programmed to accept slavery as a legitimate system. And
Yeah.
nobody ever talks about that. So multi-generationally, over thousands upon thousands of years, we have epigenetically conditioned ourselves to accept this, and we're actually fighting our own programming at this point, our genetic programming at this point. Doesn't mean you can't change it, because that's what epigenetics is all about, is
Right.
being able to change your genes. But yeah, I think it's a big issue. And the other side of it is ideological issues, like epistemological issues, where people actually just do not read and they do not learn. I mean, liberty itself, right? It comes from the word libertas or liber, right? And what that means is to be free and book, or to read, right? So we have this Roman word, and I think it's a Greek derivative as well. What it means is that you have to have education to be able to be free. What makes man unfit to be a slave is his knowledge of what liberty actually is. Now, I'm not saying that there's anybody, even if they're not knowledgeable, fit to be a slave, but I'm saying that what gives you the ability to counteract that is knowledge. You have to have knowledge of what it is. And I think one of the biggest issues, and I wanted to bring this up, is that people don't understand what true freedom actually is, because they have an issue with the ambiguity of property, because property is such a hard thing to pinpoint. So we have this, where we have the communist idea that there's no such thing as property, or all the property needs to be centralized into the state, or everything's owned by every other individual. So they have those three forms of property, and pretty much that it just doesn't belong to you. That whatever you have belongs to me, or it belongs to the centralized authority. And then you have absolute individualism, which is like, I own everything, right? And that can be a big issue as well, because like, can you actually own all the water in the world if you're a corporate conglomerate, right? Like, can you actually do that? Well, no, you're creating a dichotomy between those who need that water and those who do not, and obviously you can't own that. So property is a big issue when it comes to freedom, but freedom is defined by what property is, because what we're talking about is what violates your actual individual property rights, right? Your rights are your property. Your body is your property. Your mind is your property, and then the things you create with that are your property. And then you could take it into the digital arena. Like me and you talk about cryptocurrency a lot. Well, there's this thing called intellectual property, right? And I think intellectual property, and throughout all anarchist history and anarchist literature, it's always been frowned upon. All intellectual property is bullshit. Copyrights, patents, it's all there to restrict the access of the human race to be able to use that information to grow and to expand the race for the better. That's why I'm all for open source, and to a very big extent. So like, Tesla's information, right? There was a big issue with him patenting a lot of his stuff. So, but he had to do that because of the way the system is structured. So if the system wasn't structured that way, then people wouldn't need to have these forms of patents currently. If we didn't have the state, restricting all of our individual liberties through coercion, then we wouldn't need those types of defensive mechanisms in the system. So it's like they funnel us into these slaughterhouses of a false dialectic, right? A false choice. And that's what dialect means. Dia means through way of, and then lectus means choice. So it's through way of choice. So if they say, hey, here you go, you have, whiskey, vodka, and rum, right? These are your choices, but you don't want any of those. You want water, but those are your choices that you have. Then, it's a false choice, and then you realize that they're all owned by the same company or something like this, right? So it's even bigger false choice at that point.
Right.
So
Yeah. Lot of good points made there. The concept of intellectual property, I think that's really interesting, and that might be something to get into on a different show. You and I, or at some point, that could be cool, because I agree with what you're saying. Although I would have some questions about, say, like something specifically like art. Like a
right.
musician has they created a piece of music, and then somebody else is like, profiting off of that, or something like that, that, and I'm not like taking a side, but that's why I would be interested in just having a conversation and kind of exploring that. But regardless, that's just one of many things, and I want to keep this on topic, just on the more like fundamental aspects of freedom. So
Gotcha. We can
and
talk about that in the future. I'm totally down. I've read a
yeah.
lot about intellectual property, and there are some dangers like that. So you do have to be very cautious with that terminology.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So with this one, I definitely want to just really cover the fundamentals, because I forgot to mention this earlier, but even last show, there was someone in the comments that was, we had made a few kind of references to freedom, anarchy, whatever you want to call it, and they were kind of projectile vomiting, as I call it, in the comments of just like, oh, you want to live in the Stone Ages, and good luck keeping all the warlords at bay and all this kind of crap. The same kind of tired stuff that we hear um, time and time again, almost like these sound bites that come out of a person that has not truly explored these ideas for themselves, come to actually understand the roots of it, the logic of it. They're just reacting because we've been so programmed and indoctrinated, and even traumatized by the system that creates a codependence. And we're going to touch on that, but I wanted to kind of really first define terms, because I think that's important. Anytime you're having a conversation, you got to make sure that when I use a word, you know what I mean when I say that. Otherwise, there's going to be an automatic disagreement, when we might not even be disagreeing on the ideas. We're just disagreeing on what you think a word means, or what you think I mean by when I use a certain word. So first of all, anarchy is a very controversial term. It's simply, there's kind of two meanings to every word. There's a cultural or a contextual meaning that changes over time through culture, through different like slang and dialogues and things that progress in a society. But then there's like an intrinsic meaning that happens when you deconstruct the word based on each of its pieces, and you look at the etymological roots, how this word came to be. And it usually traces back, especially with English, you're mostly looking at things back from Germanic, Greek, and Latin is mostly what composes our English language. So with anarchy, it comes from Latin, an, meaning without, or absent of, and then archy, which refers to archons, which is simply a word for rulers. So the first thing to dispel is that it doesn't mean no rules. It doesn't mean no organization, no cooperation, no working together for common goals. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that no rulers, in other words, no authority. And what authority means, when I say it in the context of this conversation, is something that has like a superior position over others, if that makes sense. So, as in certain people or certain rules have rights above what the common person might have. Like if I say I'm a politician or I'm a policeman, suddenly I can do things that if an ordinary person did, they would be called a criminal and thrown in a cage for it, right? This is the insanity, the mental distortion that we're trying to call out with this conversation here. So anarchy is one way of saying, the absence of rulers. Another word that is, less triggery is voluntarism, which is basically saying the same thing. If you don't have a ruler imposing his will, or even if it's a democratic process, it's still acting, as a force, an enforcement, rather than just saying that all human interactions should be voluntary, and that if they're not, that they're not only of no value, but they're inherently wrong, because you can't morally initiate or force anyone to do anything. Like, if it's one thing if you want to agree to do something. Like, if you're all like, hey, let's start a garden, and you all agree on how it's done, that's one thing. And then if somebody doesn't like how it's being done, that's okay. They can just say, you know what, I'll just go start my own garden, right? Because no one's forcing them into that dynamic. But with government, there is no opting out, right? You can't call up your representative or your tax office and be like, oh, I'd like to unsubscribe from your services, please. It don't work like that, and that's really the root of the issue that we're trying to get at here. So, just to lay down these foundations here before I hand it off to you, Brandon. What it really comes down to is your personal sovereignty, and sovereignty is another word that has it's like a different way of saying anarchy. Basically means, above, and reign means to, like, if a king is reigning, he's ruling. So if you are sovereign, then you're above rulership. In other words, you cannot be ruled, right? A sovereign nation, right? That's kind of this bastardization of the word. Typically, when you hear the word sovereign, it's usually referring to that, which it's ironic, because nations are a violation of sovereignty because it subjugates its people. And so that's kind of the point we're making, is that if every individual is sovereign, not able to be ruled, or not allowing themselves to be ruled, then anarchy is the natural byproduct of that, because there are no rulers to rule over them. And what it comes back to is self-ownership. Brandon, you mentioned earlier property rights, and basically all aspects of objective morality all come back to property rights. You own yourself, your mind, your thoughts, your consciousness, your body, your actions, the fruits of your labor, and the materials which you rightfully gain, whether you create it, you purchase it through, again, a voluntary interaction. Hey, I'll give you my dollars, you give me that cup. That's a voluntary interaction. Now that cup is rightfully yours. And if someone else steals it, it may be in their possession, but it's still yours. See, that's the thing. The difference between rights and abilities that people get confused on. Someone has the ability to violate rights. That doesn't mean that they weren't your rights to begin with, right? Right? Yeah, right. Exactly. So it's all an extension of self-ownership. And when you violate someone, you're using violence against their property rights. Either you're making a claim upon their body by assaulting them, or, sexually, violating them that way, or you're stealing their property, or some form of a property right violation. So that's a very simple way that you can look at this, that kind of dispels and clarifies a lot of the confusion that can come around. Well, yeah, of course, there's a lot of subjective and gray areas when it comes to, like, right and wrong, like polyamory, or like, should you eat healthy, or like, these are all personal choices where there is, like, different routes. But we're trying to focus just on the objective parts, where there is never a right situation for you to assault someone, or rape them or steal their property. These are objective, they're universal. And the point is, if we could just understand that part, it's not going to, make everything magically disappear, all the problems disappear and make this perfect utopian world. It's just that most of the biggest issues, the worst tragedies in history, have all been as a betrayal of this truth of objective morality. It's the bullseye, right? You can argue all day about the rings around it, but if we could just understand that epicenter of right from wrong behavior, the world would transform in ways you can't even possibly imagine. So, Brandon, I know that was long-winded, but I'll let you hand it off to you now to comment on
No,
that.
that was really good. That was really good. It's funny because I had anarchism and sovereign to define as well on my screen. So I'm glad that you did that. You took the weight off my shoulders with that. But yeah, we do have this idea. The other issue that I would bring up is what is actually a right, correct? Like, what does
Yeah,
that mean? And it
right.
means an action or behavior that does not harm or violate another individual's liberty.
Initiate harm.
Yeah, or initiate harm. That's right. So you do not have the right to initiate any form of unnecessary harm onto another individual's body, mind, emotions, or their property, things like this, right? So there are forms of harm that you could consider to be a right. So harm can be kind of ambiguous when you use that. So I usually
Right.
like to use violence or violate or things like that, right? Those types of terminologies, because harm is very ambiguous. Because I could harm myself skateboarding, or we could consensually harm each other in an MMA
Yeah.
competition, right? That's consensual, right? So it has to be a non-consensual transaction between two people. So wherever there's coercive force being used, that's not a right. And that's what government comes down to.
Hmm.
Its modus operandi is to survive. And the only way that it can truly survive is by coercing the population. By de facto, it has to use coercion all the time. And by de facto, that makes it slavery, because its only means to get what it needs done to survive is through coercive force.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a big issue when it comes to people understanding like the corruption in government. Like everybody wants to divide government into little sections. Like you got the state and then you got the deep state, right? And I'm like, no, don't do that. Right. Now you're trying to identify as one section of the state is actually good and the other section is the problem. And you're trying to separate those things, but it's not that way. The whole thing is corrupt at its roots,
Right.
and the whole thing has to be restructured from ground up from its roots, you know.
Saying government corruption is like saying mafia violence.
Right.
Can't
Absolutely.
separate the two.
Yeah, you're trying to separate those two. It's like no. You're missing the actual empirical evidence of what it actually is in reality. So that's a big issue when it comes to people trying to fight the corruption. And I see conspiracy theorists getting into this a lot. And I'm not saying that conspiracies are wrong. I'm a conspiracist myself,
Yeah.
right? But I do think that the mass majority of conspiracies nowadays are pretty outlandish to a certain degree. And I think that they always run to the appeal to authority to prove to themselves that like this little section of government is corrupt, whether it's from the extraterrestrial stuff or whatever it might be, the JFK incident, it could be anything, right? And you're going to argue about these things forever rather than actually applying a true solution, which starts within yourself and getting to causality and getting in tune with your spiritual nature. And I think that's a big issue is that we're spiritually ill, when it comes to these things.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, at this point in time, like it doesn't take a rocket scientist to point out the problems, right? Like
right, absolutely.
things are getting so bad, you have to really be attached to the lie that you're living to think that everything's fine, the system is working perfectly, there's nothing wrong, But what you're saying here, I think, is that it's easy to identify the problem, but that doesn't mean you have the correct solution.
Right.
So it's like, all these conspiracy theorists, they're like, the car is broken down, there's smoke coming out of the engine, right? That's obvious. You can point at the problem very easily. But then they're saying, but what we need to do is sprinkle some magical fairy dust on the engine, and that'll fix it. Like, but so your solution is way off, even though you're correct in how you're identifying the problems, myself included, as a part of my journey of waking up to these things way back before they were quite so obvious. Just pat myself right there. But like, I went through that process of thinking, well, it's just government corruption is the problem. It's that they're abusing their power, right? But it's you know it's like saying a slave owner is abusing his power if he's whipping his slaves too much or not feeding them or something like that. It's like you're completely missing the point. The fact that their power exists to begin with is abuse. It is abuse. There's no way to not abuse it. It should not exist because it's illegitimate and immoral by its nature. So that's what we're really trying to say here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think another thing people have issues with is morality. You brought up the extremes of where they're misunderstood or there's gray areas of morality, correct? And I think that one thing is that people tend to jump to the conclusion that since you can't understand a situation's morality or ethical, situational context, then it obviously makes it all subjective. So since you can't define whether it's objective or not, then it absolutely means it's subjective. And that's a really fallacious way of thinking,
Yeah.
because that's saying since I don't have the correct information to discern what it is or is not, then it must be this thing. And that's not how you do the trivium or scientific methodology, right? That's not how you actually decide that. What you can say is that these are things that we don't understand yet. And just because we don't understand that doesn't mean that rape isn't universally immoral, So we can look at these universals, like rape, it's universally immoral. Most people will agree with that, right?
Yeah.
But then they'll turn around and flip it and say all of morality is subjective to the individual's perception. And it's like, are you consistent with this, or do you have some kind of contradiction or cognitive dissonance going on? Because obviously you have two opposing ideas in your mind. And this is the same with government, right? They think that government is going to give them freedom or give us freedom, right? And it's like, has it ever really done that? No, it's never done that. You get temporary states of a little bit of alleviation of slavery. That's it. They alleviate little spots where they're restricting your freedom, and at the same time, other areas they increase it.
Right. They're giving back the freedoms that they
I
took
already
from you
took.
to
Yeah,
begin with. Like,
yeah,
freedom is the natural state. If there's no one ruling, freedom is what is. So the only thing government can do in that regard is take your freedom and then give it back to you and say, "Oh yeah, we gave you your freedom." But just like in the quote that we covered at the beginning of this with Larkin, if you're relying on an external entity to give you freedom, you are a slave by definition, because true freedom is about independence, right? If you're outsourcing your freedom or the protection of your rights, you are not free. Did the founding fathers draft up a declaration of codependence? No, it's independence for a reason. You can't be dependent on something and be free, because you're dependent on that entity to give you what you need to make you whole, to make you sustainable. And that's the point that we're getting at here. Man, there was something else you said a minute ago. I'm trying to remember. It was about the subjective aspect. Oh, yes. So what I think that comes down to when they're saying it's subjective, nobody knows, is because they themselves don't know. They don't have the faculties to arrive at the correct answer. And it's much easier for their ego to just say, "Oh, well, it's all subjective." That way there is no right answer. I can't be wrong if there's no right, right? Right? That's how that works. So that's what they're doing. They're trying to
right.
abdicate the responsibility of using their conscience and actually being a being of moral agency by just chalking it all up to being subjective, because then, well, there's no right answer that way.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier is the ideological issues and the axiomatic issues that we have as a species, right? We're not really taught how to think. We're not really taught the seven liberal arts, such as the trivium and the quadrivium. We're not taught the scientific methodology unless it's in context of a scientific laboratory. There's a lot of different methods of learning. Hegelian dialectic method of learning, if it's used properly. There's a lot of negative things that can be used for it, like democracy, as an example of a negative aspect of the Hegelian dialectic, which is the false choice. But a dialogue between two people can be looked at as a Hegelian dialectic too, kind of like what Plato put out in his works. So we have, and Hegel actually was kind of contending with Plato's dialectics in a way, but we do have this issue of like truth too, right? So how can you get to morality without having an objective truth? You have to have an objective truth first, because if truth is just subjective, then you can just change the moral premise as well. Anything that comes after truth, is based upon whether it's objective or subjective. And the idea that someone says that truth is subjective is a objective statement in a way, because they're trying to state it that it's objectively subjective, right? So that if it's subjective, then it can subject to change. But if it's subjective, it can't change to objective. They never talk to you about that, right? So it's a very interesting dilemma. Or they say truth doesn't exist, right? And it's like, is it true that
assertion of truth?
Yeah, that's an assertion of truth.
It's the most self-defeating argument there is.
Yeah.
And I always like to say too, especially when it's people that claim to be freedom, whether they're anarchists or just libertarians or whatever, anyone who claims to be an advocate for freedom but doesn't recognize that it's based in objective morality, aren't realizing that if that's the case, then their preference for freedom is completely subjective and is no more valid than a total authoritarian that just wants to, trample on everyone. Like, if it's all subjective, then, well, if it's right for them, then it's just fine, right? Like, where's the backbone, right? That's where we're missing that component of the sacred masculine. In my opinion, that's what that's coming down to, is that we've become softened with this kind of new age ideology that judgment is bad, right? We're not supposed to judge anyone, which, it's all good. Everyone's just on their path and they're just making their mistakes and learning and this and that. And I mean, there's some truth to that, but what we need is men, specifically men that are embodied in their masculinity, because that is their role in society. It's not that women can't be masculine. It's that it doesn't really feel good to them. It's not what they're wired to do. And men like being men who are healthy anyways. We need masculine embodied men to have a backbone and say, no, that's bullshit. I don't care what you say. I don't care how you try to justify it. It's wrong and it ain't gonna fly. Strong, healthy boundaries and judgment, not discernment. That's a pussification of the word. Discernment is, just differentiating two different things. Well, this is this and that's that. And they're all just, neither's good or bad. They're just different, right? Judgment is, no, this is good, this is bad. Freedom, good, slavery, bad. Until we have that as the majority consensus in the world, slavery will continue. So this softening of society, especially men, is a large reason, if not the main reason, why slavery is the condition here.
Yeah, we have a huge agenda to emasculate men and even to murder the masculine spirit in both genders, right? They want to pervert it, invert it, and contort it so that it obviously meets their end goal of more control and more slavery, So, it is our natural way of being to be free, right? That is our natural place to be in nature itself, in reality. And if we live in a state of slavery or non-freedom, then we obviously become ill as a society. We're already ill if we're already in that state, but we become more ill. We become extravagantly more ill as it escalates into more global slavery and then universal slavery if we expand outwardly. So this is the issue: is that as long it's like a virus, right? It's like cancer, you know, but this spreads from individual to individual. It's a mind virus. This idea of the belief in authoritarianism, this dogmatic belief in authoritarianism. And you have to understand what something is by what it is not, right? So if you want to understand what freedom is, you have to understand what it is not. So what is freedom not? It is, not slavery, obviously. So we have a lot of ambiguity in the word freedom, because a lot of people think of freedom like, you could say freedom from, certain types of restrictions on their own life, which have nothing to do with slavery. I'm talking about like being free from the clothes I'm wearing, or being free in many different aspects, right? Like there's so many different types of restrictions that you can apply that contextual word of freedom onto. But when we're talking about freedom, we mean the absence of slavery specifically. That's the restriction that we're talking about. And that's what we mean by liberty. So I usually like to use the word liberty because that's more contextually accurate for what we're trying to get to, because we could be free from all kinds of stuff, free from the depressive thoughts in my own mind, or free from this or free from that. There's all kinds of different things that we could be free from, but those are not coercive forces that are implemented or initiated upon you by an authoritarian figure. They're not being forced upon you by an outside source that has the choice to do or do not those things. It has the choice to say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I like that you're using liberty, because it evokes, right? Just like different words, they have like an energetic charge to them. So liberty, there's a lot less ambiguity to that word,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to free. I mean, free, like you mean like the little chicken nuggets they give out at the at the
Right.
grocery store, kind of free, like
Well,
liberty,
we also, we're
right?
sorry to interrupt, but we also have the issue of like a complete socialistic or communistic state where like you can be a complete prisoner and be well taken care of, like have all your needs met. You could have all your food
Everything's
free and provided.
free. Yeah,
Yeah, everything's provided to you. Like that's such a
that's a
great
great
existence
point.
for some people, And it's
That's a
like,
great point.
well, I don't think so. You're still living in a cage, and you're still being coerced, and you don't have any choices here. So no, you're not actually living in liberty. You
And
know.
the point that I wanted to make here about what you were saying, Brandon, which was a great thing that you brought up, is freedom has to be absolute. So what you get a lot when you start having conversations with people about this, they're like, well, okay, I like what you're saying, but if we didn't have government to enforce laws, if we didn't have police in jails and the judicial system or whatever, then crime would run amok. Okay, first of all, every time you pass by a cop that's pulled somebody over on the side of the road, you're witnessing a crime. Okay, that's the first thing to realize, that crime is already amok, and it's legalized.
Mhm.
It's a lot more rampant in that way because people actually see it, and they don't even see it, recognize it as a crime. It's a routine traffic stop, right? If you call it routine, somehow that normalizes it and makes it like, oh, well, it's just okay. It's an everyday occurrence, right? That's different, right? We make an exception, a moral exception for government. So that's the first thing to realize. Second, no rulers means no rulers. Anarchy doesn't mean no government rulers. It doesn't specify. It doesn't care who it is that's ruling. So if there was this situation where the warlords take over, or like all these gangs start forming, that actually is not anarchy, because now they've become the ruling class.
Right.
That's the point. And you can talk about this power vacuum, that there will always be some dominant force or whatever. But ask yourself, does the average person, the average normal everyday person, have any desire to rule over other people? Not really. right? They might do some shady things. They might be a little bit, selfish and immoral in certain ways in their personal life, but they're not trying to like have this executive power over people of large amounts of people, right? Generally, typically, and they're not interested in that for the most part. So we're talking about a small percentage of the population that would be like that. And if they're the minority, then how do you expect that they're going to be the dominant power? The only reason the government can be a minority and be the dominant power is because people believe in it, and actually condone and advocate it, and they go and vote for who should be the ruler, who should be the guy holding the whip while they're getting, shredded. That's the only reason that thing exists. If it wasn't that way, those people, the majority would simply not would not allow that kind of situation to go on, especially if we removed that, what you could call a safety net or whatever, like even if it's a mental, belief in that it's keeping everyone safe, and suddenly we're all personally responsible. You know how much gun sales would go through the roof because, oh, well, I guess if there's no one else protecting us, we've got to protect ourselves. Yeah, no shit. It's always been that way. You've always been responsible for your own safety. Again, if you're outsourcing your independence in any way, you're enslaving yourself in the same action. So if everyone took that on their own shoulders of personal safety and not just for yourself, but how many stories are there of people, citizens or whatever you want to call them, being the reason that they stopped a shooter, and the police showed up 20 minutes later with hot chocolate and blankets, right? That's the story. So I mean, that is already the case. The government is just like this idea that the government keeps you safe. It's just a smoke and mirrors, right?
Absolutely, it is. And yeah, I mean, we all need to take personal responsibility for our own self-defense, and we do have the right to have. We can delegate rights, right? We can't delegate wrongs. So let's say that
Right.
I am an old lady who's in a wheelchair, and I need to hire on my neighbor to protect me in this time where there might be a lot of street gangs coming through the streets and robbing people's houses. So I hire them on in a voluntary transaction.
Right.
I think they're morally obligated to do so anyways. Well, let's just say that they actually hire them on to do this as a service. Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
So what government has done is they monopolize the use of force and violence, right? So they monopolize that so that nobody can have anything like that. You have to go to them or it's an illegal use,
It's
you
the
know?
exact thing the mafia does. They
Right.
come in, they rough you up, they say, pay us our money, pay us what you owe us, right? That's called taxation. And then they say, it's a protection racket. We'll rough you up, but we'll make sure no one else does
Right, right.
too. So you're protected in that way. It's literally no different from that.
Right. And you brought up another example, like the traffic stop. And I think this is what a lot of people fail to recognize is that there is a form of a violation taking place there, even if the police officer lets you go. They have stolen your time from you.
And
Time
put
is
you
your
under coercion and
Yeah,
duress.
and they put you under coercion in doing so, right? And that's what I mean by stealing your time. So they're coercing your time from you. And you could be shot in this situation. You could just be reaching for something. Maybe your pen fell on the floor or something, and you go to pick it up and you could be shot immediately with this. But my point is that um, we don't treat time sacredly anymore. We don't look at time as a form of currency. That is ultimately our true currency that we transact with is our time, our attention and our time, what we're spending our time on and what we're paying attention to, correct?
Yeah.
So, and all other forms of currency or all other forms of transactions come out of this. So like I hear people like saying, "Oh, he was such a nice cop, he let me go." And I'm like, "No, no, no, no." You know, you've been euphemized. Your brain is not functioning. He literally was holding you up at gunpoint. His gun might not have been out, but he was a road pirate and he was there coercing you. And
It's
if you did one
implied.
little thing, yeah, to comply with their force, and you don't have a choice, if you drove off, they're going to chase you down, they're going to have helicopters on you. You don't have a choice to go anywhere else. You have to pull over or you're a criminal. And it's a victimless crime. They're creating you into the victim. You haven't done any victimization. Let's say you were speeding. Well, okay, you went 5-10 miles over the speeding limit. All right, well, there is no victim there. You've not actually hurt somebody in this scenario, and it's not like you're speeding through a road where there's tons and tons of children running around, where the potential is so high that you could endanger a child's life. That maybe there needs to be some force to stop you from doing that. Which I think that's pretty irrational to do anything like that, obviously. But you're just driving down the road 10 miles, faster than you should be. Well, no victim, so no crime. So what they do is that they legislate all these laws, and in most of these laws are based off non-victim crimes, and they just create more crimes artificially. All these crimes are just escalating artificially. So the more laws we have, the more that they can use violence against you.
That's a great point. Every law created, you just created a new crime, because if someone simply disobeys that law, they're now considered a criminal.
Right. So all violations can be pretty simplified into any forms of violation against anybody's natural law liberties or principles.
Right.
They're really simple when you get down into it. Murder, theft, coercion, assault, they're all very basic and very,
and
rape,
trespass.
trespassing. They're all very basic. And then you can extend those and kind of figure out the contexts of how those things are being implemented. And then, I want to kind of go back to the mob rule thing, because I think I see this a lot right now. And this is something that I actually am worried about, is this, lynch mob kind of mentality that we have going on right now. Right. So this lynch mob mentality is that you can just take very, very vague examples and run with it and then judge somebody and actually execute them if need be, rather than doing an in-depth investigation on whether that actually happened, that violence actually took place. Let's say there's a rape example, right? And somebody just hears it and then they go and actually kill this person without actually doing investigative research into this. This is a big issue. And I see this coming from the masses a lot. And that's very, very dangerous, where you do not do an investigative process to prove whether this thing actually happened or not. You're just taking word of mouth or, rumors, right? Whatever rumor it might be. And you're trying to take that justice into your own hand without actually figuring out empirically whether it happened. And that's a big, dangerous spot to be in. And, I'm not advocating for government in any way, but at least there's a system somewhat there where they're trying to use some empirical evidence to actually prove something. Usually it's corrupted and contorted and, and twisted up, and it doesn't actually get us the results. But
at least if you're looking at like the jury process or something like that.
Right. So and the reason why is because they can't just completely restrict those things, because it's not going to function properly for long-term stability. Lynch mobs are extremely unstable. They're extremely volatile,
And think about the environment that creates for a society. If it happens to one person, you might be the one cheering it on, but then what happens when somebody says that about you? That is real chaos right there, because there's no actual basis in natural law. It's just whatever, it's not rooted in truth. That's really what chaos is when there's no rhyme or reason to it. Natural law is the thing that actually gives rhyme and reason to everything and is a divine cosmic order. And when you're just leaving things up to that, and especially what makes this so terrifying is look at the state of the average person mentally. They're in so much pain that they have so much like angst towards themselves, and they're projecting that outward. They have so much like disdain for humankind. You hear people are idiots, and there's truth to that, but when you let that completely corrupt your worldview, and that's the world that you are living in your experience, is that every person is an idiot, every person is just trying to exploit you or whatever like that, of course you're going to be looking for something to channel all that hatred and anger into. So at the first sign of anything, I mean, you see this online, even when you're not talking about lynching anyone or something like that, but one rumor starts and people will jump on that and just devour it like a bunch of piranhas without taking a second to actually look into the validity of what's being said. They're ready. They're looking for any excuse to become, to get into a fight, basically.
Absolutely, and that's well said. I like the piranha statement, and that's
It's
pretty accurate to what it is. So that was really
it's
well
a
said.
feeding frenzy, bro.
Yeah, it is a feeding frenzy, and we, as a species, we've been conditioned to feed off of drama like
Yeah,
that, right? Through Hollywood and through the media and all this stuff. That's sensationalism, right? We're going to sensationalize all this violence and stuff. So, any law that we have in place is pretty much already inherently a violation of an individual's liberty because
hmm,
it's based on authority. So even if that law is repetitive and let's say it's in alignment with natural law, like do not kill, right? Well, it's still a means for them to take that and extrapolate off of that and make other types of laws from that because they're saying that we have the authority to write this on paper because we're the authors. It's in the word authority, right? We get to authorize this and we can now do whatever we want with this. We get to dictate all of this stuff through speech and through writing. So man has the absolute virtuous obligation to disobey all unjust laws, right? But all just laws, you're going to live in harmony with naturally. You don't need them, you know?
right.
And if somebody violates that, then you're going to obviously have a means to deal with that violation of that unjust law. You don't need to make it into a complete system where you have a third party that's going to come in and you got to do all this process and all this legislative, bureaucracy, right? All
Yeah,
this bureaucracy, which is just horrible, right? It makes it all complex, and usually nobody actually gets any justice when it comes down to it, right? So it's a really, really big issue. So yeah, anarchy doesn't mean without rules. So it doesn't mean we're not going to have any types of systems set in place for, like what I was talking about, investigative methods to actually prove whether the crime actually took place or not. So some people would have an issue with that because they're like, oh, well, this is going to eventually create, more power and greed and people wanting to be in these positions of authority. Well, not if we understand truth and natural law principles. That's the defense against that. That's how we live in harmony with that, right? So we have the issues of you were bringing up some stuff earlier, not quite on this point, but like people were like, what will we do without government? What about the roads? What about this? What about that? Right. And then the first thing is they've never done any education. They've never actually read anything about stateless societies and how they function. They've never read any anarchist books. They've never read any anarchist authors, right? They don't know who Lysander Spooner is, Benjamin Tucker, Ralph Waldo Emerson, any of these people, right? Larkin Rose. There's all kinds of authors out there that people have never read where they actually have, consistently structured a society and even in some spots, like actually performed and implemented these in small communal aspects where they function properly without a state, you know? So people just are very uneducated. And this is something I was talking to my uncle about, which is like, pre, let's say pre the counterculture time period, anarchistic literature was pretty well developed. Okay. Like with Lysander Spooner, who was a lawyer, Mikhail Bakunin, Leo Tolstoy. There's all kinds of great anarchist literature. But after that, it's very rare. And it's because it was warred on and co-opted by the state and by the media and by Hollywood, So what it turned into was this counterculture, like punk movement that came out of the UK at a certain time period, and then it got wrapped up in neo-Nazism, anti-fascism, which ended up being fascism in itself, and pretty much a bunch of left-wing ideologies. Really, is what it comes down to. A bunch of postmodernists is really what it comes down to, So my point here is that it's been warred against, obfuscated, And this is why we see such a rejection of any form of anarchist talking points. So usually I won't use the word anarchy anymore. I'll use abolitionist, right? I'll say I'm an abolitionist, which means I'm actually going to abolish all forms of slavery, you know, because anarchism is just the ideology. It's just the ideal state of being, but it doesn't mean you're actually applying it. Abolitionism is, hey, I'm actually going to stop this from taking place, so you have to have both of those pillars. Like, yes, I'm an anarchist, do no harm, but I'm also an abolitionist, take no shit. I'm going to stand up and defend my rights, which is what you were talking about with the masculinity. So I
Right.
think that's a term that we should start using a little bit more, as abolitionism, because that's really what we are. We're trying to take action, be active, and prevent any further harm for the protection of posterity, because this
Right.
really comes down to our children. Whatever we're allowing to take place now will multiply, and then be put onto the children, and it will become their responsibility to deal with. you know
Absolutely. Yeah. Because when you're looking at what's the last thing you just said before that?
the abolitionism.
Yes, yes. To be truly an abolitionist is to be just as much against the common criminal as you are against the government. It doesn't
Right.
matter who's doing the violating, who's doing the enslavement. You're opposed to all of that. And that's where it comes down to, being an agent of truth, being an agent of natural law, and being ready to, defend the peace by any means necessary. Even if you're just a normal person, you don't have to have a magical shiny badge or any kind of so-called authority to do so. In reality, even now, even with the existence of the government, anyone has the right to use their own discernment. And if someone is being the cause of violence, of disturbing the peace, then anyone should be able to put that threat down by any means necessary, because they aren't being violent. They're actually restoring the peace. They aren't being hateful. They're acting out of love for their fellow human beings, for truth and morality itself. And that's what it's going to take. That's the only way that this dynamic is going to shift. And when you have that natural law understanding, you'll recognize evil no matter who's doing it, no matter how much it's been euphemized and legitimized and authorized. All of that is bullshit, because wrong is wrong, period. And you'll know it when you see it if your heart-based intelligence is online. And you will not tolerate that at an individual level, which then cascades out into the collective level. And if we were doing that, the government would literally wither up and die, because it's a weed in the garden that just saps up all the resources and nutrients from everything else around it that's actually producing value. If we all learned healthy boundaries and stopped feeding it, it would just shrivel up and die. That's it. And I think that's a good place to end this. I do have another interview for my podcast to get to, so unfortunately I'm going to have to cut the show a little bit short, even though it was 2 hours. I mean, that's a pretty good amount of time. I see we've got 24 viewers that have been pretty consistently
Nice.
watching. That's a great turnout. I hope everyone's enjoying this show, and clearly we're going to have to bypass the call-in segment for this show. But let me know in the comments, first of all, what did you think about what we shared here? Is this new to you? Is this stuff you've all heard before, but did you like the way we kind of put it into words? And possibly, what would you think about continuing, like, for a part 2 next week? We could, because I mean, we only got into like a third of the notes that I had, let alone
Same
taking
here.
calls. So we could make a part 2 next week, get back into this topic, and then have a call-in section for people to come on. They can, if you want to debate, or you have a different opinion, we're more than happy to have that conversation. But do let us know in the comments what you think about that, if that's something you'd be interested in. But yeah, Brandon, thank you so much for joining the show, man. Your wisdom, your rhetoric is always on point. You definitely brought a lot of value and sense to the conversation here. So I'm very grateful for that. I think it was very valuable conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm completely down to do next week as well if the audience is interested in that, because I definitely would like to explain like how a stateless society would function, because I think
Mhm.
that that's something a lot of people don't talk about. So maybe if somebody wants to, debate me on it, all right, let's do it. Let's
Yeah,
do it. I'm down for it. I'm friendly, so don't worry. I won't use that homonyms.
yeah.
But yeah, it's been a great pleasure, man. I really appreciate being on here again, and really support the work that you're doing, and keep it up, man. Keep up
Thank
the
you.
great work.
Thank you, brother. Always a pleasure. Quickly tell the audience where they can find you.
Oh yeah, you can find my work at seedtruth.com, which should be on the screen there. And then you can also find Seed Truth Academy on YouTube. So if you just throw that in your search engine, you can find that. You can also find me on the One Great Work Network. You can find me under my name, Brandon Martin. And you can find me on Odyssey and BitChute, and all those channels as well. So I really appreciate it if you go and give the Seed Academy a follow and a like, or even a share. There's all kinds of great work there from all types of speakers from all over the world, top caliber work, top caliber content,
I
including Logan. Logan's on there as well.
Thank you. I second that, Brandon. You've been in the game actually well longer before I have. You're a veteran in this endeavor, and your work is part. It played a part in inspiring me to start what I'm doing. So thank you for all your contribution to truth and freedom and morality. Keep it up, and definitely we'll have to do this again soon, if not possibly next week. So. Thanks again for sharing your time and attention with us, brother.
Awesome.
Thanks. All right, everyone, that's all the time we have today. Please leave some love down below in the comments. Like the video. Once again, that's the best thing you can do to support this channel, help it grow, help bypass the algorithms, the suppression of truth. Click the bell to get notified when we go live and when we drop new videos. That way, again, you're not relying on the algorithm to show you or let you know about these things. I hope you enjoyed. This was a fun and exciting conversation. I thought it was very valuable. I hope you agree. So thank you all so much for being here. You are the reason that I continue to show up and do this work. So thank you again. Much love to you. And until next time, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.